Today, I have with me someone who inspired me as a student, as an entrepreneur, and now as a host. I have with me Professor Kotler, known as the father of modern marketing. For over 50 years, he has taught at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. Professor Kotler's book, Marketing Management, the very one that inspired me, is the most widely used textbook in marketing around the world. He has been honored as one of the world's leading marketing thinkers and has been an author, consultant, and the S.C. Johnson and Son Distinguished Professor at the Kellogg School of Management. His books have been translated around the world, and more than, I think, 150 books by him. In 2019, Professor Kotler began an open source project to model the world's most urgent problems, the Wicked 7 project, which aims to create an online movement of individuals and institutions interested in finding virtuous solutions to pressing wicked problems. Something I think everyone here at the Rise World Summit will resonate with. Professor Kotler, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and joining us today for this fireside chat. Today, as a part of the fireside chat, I know you're going to do something very different, a case study for us, and I think a treat for all those who never had that opportunity to be in your classrooms. So over to you, Professor Kotler. We look forward to hearing from you.
Happy to be invited again. I was invited last year to speak for the Rise World Summit, and I was told that I could choose any topic that would be of interest to the audience. And I have an interesting problem that I've been working on. It's called the problem of choosing a leader. So let me say that all organizations need a leader. When the existing leader leaves, a new leader must be found. The organization may want a leader resembling the old leader, if the old leader did a good job, or prefer a very different leader because the times are different. So I'm going to take a case study. And some of you in India may have heard about this, but I'll review it because we can learn so much about many things from this situation. In 2023, which is just a year ago, Harvard's board decided to invite a new president, and her name was Claudine Gay, and that would be the first Black woman, the first woman and the first Black woman to be president of Harvard University. And she seemed quite qualified. She had a PhD. She had joined Harvard to teach. She rose from one rank to another rank. She was at the head of a big department too. It was clear that she knew how to lead people, and it was clear that she was a scholar. However, a certain event took place, not only at her University of Harvard, but at also Penn, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT, where a congressional committee wanted to interview the heads of big universities because they thought there was too much thinking that was more or less liberal thinking. And they wanted to put questions to make sure that these colleges are not only creating a generation of liberal thinkers. The words started to be used. There's two groups, the woke people and the anti-woke people. The woke people are awakened to the problems and social justice and other things. And the conservative people, mostly Republicans in the United States, thought we're paying too much attention to climate, we're paying too much attention to race, we're reading the wrong books and should ban some books, and so on. So this congressional committee posed the question. One of the members said, what would you do with a student or a group at your university calling for killing the Jews? Now, we know, most of us know how we would answer that. We would say that's free speech, but it's not the kind of free speech we cannot allow everything to be free speech, including insane things like that. But instead, these three presidents, by the way, all women, which is nice that major universities are headed by women, said that it depends on the circumstances. Now, that's something they've been taught to, that yes, give me more of the question and the situation, then I'll answer it. But under what situation would it be okay to kill other people? Apparently they were guided by lawyers hired to train these three presidents to say it all depends. Okay. And so that happened, and one of them resigned from the University of Pennsylvania. The MIT person did not resign, but remained on. But the Harvard people were under a lot of pressure, and they asked Claudine to resign, which she did. Now, that sounds unfortunate and very arbitrary, but let's see. The trustees were criticized by the faculty and students and the donors on what they did with Claudine Gay. Because we know that Claudine should have said Harvard would not allow students to talk about killing Jews or any other group. That would exceed the limits of free speech. So Harvard set up a committee to look more deeply into Claudine's scholarship, which they did think she thought she was a person of merit. But apparently she had not published a book in her area. As she wrote a dozen articles that were published, but they were of average quality. And then they found out that her doctoral dissertation had some passages which were clearly plagiarized, and she should have mentioned the footnotes to those three parts. So the question was raised, why didn't Harvard choose a much more acclaimed scholar, black or white? Was Claudine chosen in part for social justice reasons? In other words, we had a balancing merit with a nice dose of social justice and anti-racism. And of course, I said this already, that committee was anti-woke and so on, but let's move on. So let's look at one of the questions that come up in this case of a leader. But first, it's the problem of affirmative action. What do we mean by affirmative action? After the Civil War in the United States, slaves were freed, but couldn't get jobs or education easily. And the segregation really lasted for 100 years. Do you know, when I remember in the 1960s that it said no, for whites only. There were most restaurants would not let a black come in, and hotels, same thing. And until the President Lyndon Johnson, meeting with Martin Luther King, brought in the civil rights movement to establish non-discrimination by race or sex. Finally, many companies and colleges went further and said, you know, we've been too discriminating in the past. We should give a little preference to people who normally would have been discriminated against. In other words, there may be some people who don't have the top merit, but we should give them opportunities to go to college. As a matter of fact, make sure that enough colleges have some black people at the college who were, accepted, and so on. So affirmative action was pretty much adopted both by many, many companies and many colleges. And I was positive about that. More recently, a number of states started to outlaw affirmative action on the grounds that it was leading to reverse discrimination against more qualified white people. So they're actually, in some states, abandoning affirmative action as being prejudicial to white people. Okay. There's another issue, and it is called, is meritocracy a trap? Now, in the United States and maybe many other countries, there's the belief that rewards from the society should go to who? To those with ability, talent, and hard work. Because there are some people who don't work hard and don't have much talent and so on. Okay, so going back to the case of Claudine, did she have merit? I would say she had merit. She had good training and worked hard. However, maybe someone with more merit would have been a better choice, except they may have wanted social justice to be part of their decision. Now, the best book I've read on meritocracy, which has the title, Is Meritocracy a Trap?, was written by Daniel Markovits, and he does believe it's a trap, and that it produces an unhappy society. That's an interesting theory. He says, who do you think works the hardest in a society with meritocracy? Is it the upper class, the middle class, or the working class? Who works the hardest? He makes the assertion it's the upper class. It's the leaders. The top leaders are so focused on building their business that they neglect their family, their children. And yes, they have the material wealth now and the mansion and maybe a ship or something. But basically, he says, many of them are unhappy people. There's not a minute for idleness. Okay, what about the middle class? He says the middle class is also unhappy. Let's distinguish between the upper middle class and the lower middle class. The upper middle class wants to be in the top class. You know, they don't know about whether the top people are happy or not. They want to be more top. But they didn't go to a top school. In other words, they may have an education equivalent to Harvard's, but it's not in their credentials that they were that special. So they're frustrated. They make a good living. They're the upper middle class. They can cover their costs and send their kids to college. The lower middle class is frustrated, especially because they are facing stagnant income and rising costs and rising debt. And they're an unhappy class. And the working class is always with stagnant wages, rising costs, debt, no money for college for their kids, and they're unhappy. It's quite a picture that if you are dedicated mainly to meritocracy, we're going to have a very unhappy country. By the way, there are statistics on the level of happiness of different countries. You may know that Finland is the happiest country in the world, 2 or 3 times in a row. And the Scandinavian countries are also the Nordic countries, so-called, always are in the top 10 when you do a survey of how happy people are in that country, a survey of how much well-being is there in the country, how much education is there in the country, how much health is there in the country. Now, they're smaller countries, and they do believe in meritocracy. Those Nordic countries believe very highly in meritocracy. They don't have a race problem, so social justice isn't kind of an issue often, although sometimes there are minority groups in a country that are maybe mistreated. But anyways, so this whole Harvard situation raises questions about, was affirmative action the right thing to do to make up for the bad past? And how much should you just be dedicated to meritocracy, or should you balance it with social justice? What is the balance? So it looks like loving only meritocracy creates a lot of unhappy people. Loving only social justice creates a mix of happy and unhappy people, because some people are unhappy about this, those who, the whites who are discriminated against, but it does please a lot of people that we're giving social justice. And the thing I ended up wondering, if I were a member of Harvard's board now, who would I hire? Because the world's watching that. Should Harvard now hire another Black woman scholar, but making sure she has greater academic merit than the previous one? Well, that would look like they're catering to they made a mistake and they're trying to make it up that way. But maybe they should hire an eminent white woman scholar with great academic credentials. Or maybe don't even bring a woman into it. Go to a male scholar with great credentials. Or, and I almost favor this one, Harvard is a big, big business. It's not a small company. We normally want people trained as business people to lead a business. And in other words, I noticed that one of the critics who graduated from Harvard, who's running a big hedge fund, was the one that just says, fire the whole board at Harvard. They made a terrible mistake. The more I think about what he said, he's right, but I think he's aiming to be asked to be the president of Harvard. So I don't have the answer, but I'm going to eagerly wait to see what they decide. So some conclusions about leadership, since all companies have to have a leader. An organization ought to be driven by a set of values and by co-creation ideas, that we're a team, we're co-creating value, and we're innovative. We're an innovative organization. Now, that wasn't said in my previous comments, but I am now saying, I'm bringing this in. When I choose a brand, it could be a brand of car, a brand of cereal. I'd like to know more about the one who makes it, and not just see their advertising about how good a product it is. I want to know what they care about. Do they care about the things I care about as a set of values? And are they innovative? Okay. Secondly, an organization needs to use systems thinking in hiring its leader and in hiring its employees and running the organization. Now, one can make a big talk on just systems thinking, which is in contrast to just running a business by intuition and history, the way you used to run things. Okay. Third, an organization must address how it will handle a number of alphabet soups. One is called SDGs, and that's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, of which, by the way, happiness is one of them. Happiness in a nation. And I happen to be on a board of the World Happiness Foundation, which is dedicated to increasing happiness, but it's going about it now by even developing a system of coaches in happiness. Coaches in well-being, coaches in happiness, who are going through courses on creating happiness in others. I think that's interesting. What's CSR? Well, that's something we've always asked of an organization, not only to make a good product and at a good price and so on, but to do corporate social responsibility. And the biggest issue there is climate responsibility. Don't pollute the air and all that and go beyond that. So CSR and ESG overlaps with some of that, but it stands for economic, social, and governance considerations and that need to be addressed in running a company. And then DEI summarizes the idea, and I think it's a very good idea. Every organization should favor diversity. That is, if they are all homogeneous in that company, it will be groupthink. They'll be very limited in seeing other ways to think. And of course, if they're there to serve customers and half of their customers are diverse, very different from each other, they, as an organization, should have some diversity and equity and inclusion. So I would say that in choosing a leader should be aware of those organizations and philosophies, and hopefully the organization should choose an enlightened leader. Okay, that's about what I got into. But it's interesting how a case can get into basic questions about, about merit and about discrimination and things like that. Walter, you want to make any comments? Or Karen?
No, I know this is a very big challenge, but I'm not very sure whether we have yet found a final answer.
I know.
It is a huge challenge. It's all right talking about enlightened leaders, but who is an enlightened leader?
They'll tell you if you ask them, but that's not the way to find out.
Yeah.
I mean, if we put the question to them, they'll say, I am enlightened and whatever. But you're absolutely right. You as a top scientist in management and worked with so many companies must have been asked often, we need a new leader. Walter, do you know where we should go and what we should set down as the traits we want?
I don't know whether we have come to that stage or anybody has very successfully done that.
Yeah, because we keep seeing some poor people appointed. You learn about whether the leader was good or bad afterwards. But you are betting.
Yeah. So when you say that, it was once said that Bhutan was the place which was the happiest in the world. A small country like Bhutan.
Yes.
Now, Bhutan has a population of just 800,000 people. All of us are really, in the present environment, desperately looking around for the answers. And I think even this RISE conference is itself an attempt by many people in diverse situations trying to find that answer. When you talk about democracy a lot of the time, I think many times we forget that democracy was initiated by, or first brought in by the Greeks, who had made it a precondition that it would be a governance by the enlightened people who are elected from an enlightened elect.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've gone on from that definition of democracy at that time, of Socratic time, to having a democracy of enlightened people trying to be elected by many times unenlightened.
Mm. Mm.
And this ends up many times in many countries by unenlightened being elected by the unenlightened. So therefore, you have then a premise that democracy first requires nearly 100% education. Enlightened meant educated at that time. So, which doesn't happen, which in today's context, that is why maybe the Nordic countries have come closer to the situation of happiness, as they call it, because they are at 98% literacy. Many of our countries are at 70, 60, sometimes 50% literacy. And then we are trying to choose leaders from among them. And the leaders are elected by numbers, not by levels of enlightenment. So it makes it all very complex in terms of mental content, contribution, or just numbers as human beings. One person, one vote. Is a more enlightened person enlightened to 3 votes instead of one? And an unenlightened only one vote? Don't know. I mean, that hasn't happened yet. Will we come to that to try to correct the situation? Better would we correct the situation by insisting on wide attempt to make it at least 97, 98% literacy, so that there is a certain level of enlightenment. That again is a dream. Is that possible? With 8 million people, I think Bhutan had done that. Again, like Nordic countries, come to 97, 98% literacy. But now you have a situation where Bhutan is in problems because they're having great economic problems. And lots of Bhutanese are running out of the country. And here was once, only a few years ago, the happiest country in the world. Do you blame the leadership for this? Or you blame just the environment for this? Which leader could have prevented this to happen from happening? So I keep asking these questions and not really finding the answer. And I think one can keep on debating.
In other words, we stumble along in
Yes,
our decision making. We stumble along with hope. We have certain devices. For example, many of us want to prevent a bad nominee for president from being elected. So we campaign, and we have now 2 states who won't let him even run because we're enlightened enough. There's enough enlightenment in the nation to know that this is an unenlightened person and dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we have not done that very often because a lot of the candidates are unenlightened themselves.
Yeah.
Not dangerous, but just unenlightened.
Yeah.
So the most perfect solution would be not just an aristocracy, but an enlightened aristocracy. And better than an enlightened dictator. And in other words, if we could all agree on in a nation, here are several people we all trust. It's like we do with the Supreme Court in the United States, which now is under some doubt. But we would say, let a court of the best thinkers, in a sense, who care about us, run the country. But so we'll leave this to the political scientists to help us out if possible.
So I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes, perfection is not a state that we're ever going to achieve. I think that's
Right.
the reality of humanity, right? If we were perfect, the world wouldn't be what it is today. And so for me, I think it's always like you said, we keep hoping, we keep stumbling along, but with the right intent, hopefully we are on the right path. I mean, it'll never be perfect. I've always come to that conclusion. But if you can keep moving ahead and move with the right intent, then I think, you're halfway there, if not more, if not more. So,
Well, my talk was more about finding a leader in a situation
right.
than finding a country that was enlightened. I think every remark Walter made is perfect, and
Right.
it's unsettling too. But the main thing then is what goes on in every country is thousands of organizations need a leader, and I would think that Walter, with the wonderful books he's written about management, can even point to specific book or books of his that would provide guidance to a company now trying to, which means it would put the criteria to look for in judging the candidates for the same job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Veer, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask one more question of
Sure.
Professor Kotler. Incidentally, I must tell you, I took your book, The Advancing the Common Good, from Mr. Kotler, and Mr. Vieira, and I've been holding on to it because I've been studying it, but I promise to give it to you back, Mr. Vieira.
Thank you.
But I did have one question from there, which I've been wanting to ask for a very long time, and that was that, you speak about the three stakeholder groups. You talk about government, you talk about industry, and then, of course, you talk about civil society and NGOs. But you haven't spoken about academia. And that's very surprising, with your own background. So I was just wondering,
Mhm.
because when we've designed our models and frameworks, we always talk about these four stakeholder groups, government, industry, civil society, and academia. So I was just wondering, why is it that you did not touch on that aspect in your work?
Well, I have thought about it, but I haven't written any thinking. The colleges and universities are now under great inspection and judgment. I mean, it's not just the Harvard case, but are they teaching the right things? Are they preparing people for the jobs that the economy will have in the future? Is it helpful for someone to learn Greek or to study the ancient Greece society, because one of the things that colleges being now so focused on careers and jobs, the humanities are dying.
Yes.
And what happens there is very interesting. I will tell you about something else that it leads to. Right now in the United States, there's a movement to help senior people, particularly those who were at the top of companies, but who have to retire, to face another 20 or 30 years after work. In other words, post work. And it's a big trauma to them because they always had the idea that when they retire, they're going to learn a new instrument or travel or play golf or whatever. But when it comes to actually retiring and losing all that power and all the people they guided, they find each thing they thought they would do is empty of satisfaction compared to what they had running a company.
Right.
So the idea arose to David Brooks and one other person. I'll tell you about it. David Brooks is our very wonderful columnist for the our Times magazine. And he said recently that colleges should have a subject for retiring people who will meet each other and share their traumas, since they're all at a loss of purpose. And by talking to each other, they will find new friends, which comes out of sharing your problems, and also new ideas. They will start reading about Aristotle and about Plato, and which they never. If the fellow was an engineer, he never paid attention. He doesn't know who we're talking about when we name some of these people. So then there's another guy named Chip Conley, who I've also celebrated because he ran a hotel called Joie de Vivre, which in French is creating joy,
Wow.
creating joy. And he noticed the same thing. He said that his whole hotel business is a habitat for happiness. He creates a habitat for happiness. But the main thing is, in later life, he's decided to start what is called the Academy for Elders. People who have retired, but who have a lot of energy and life left in them, but don't have purpose. And he would like every city, every big city, to have a place they can go and meet other people who are also looking for purpose and meaning. When you said I have not talked about academics. I was talking about the fact that maybe colleges should not be just for young people. They are a way to renew your purpose in life by going back to the great books and to the great experiences. And maybe some of your great Indian universities might rethink how to bring in older people also who have a lust, a passion for learning more. Okay, now I think we'll talk about, but go back to the I think who should lead the university and bring in the new thinking. And that's the question. That's why I'm happy there's controversy about, are we teaching the right things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the answer is, at the end of the day, it must be meritocracy, because programs to uplift, help, support can never be at the cost of final outcomes, because ultimately there are desired outcomes from everything that you do, right? I mean, there is a certain level, you want to target something, you want to achieve something, you have certain goals, and you cannot make decisions that are suboptimal in that light. However, at the same time, you don't want to leave people behind, because that's what the SDGs spoke about.
That's the balance.
Leave no one behind. You have to have parallel mechanisms to bring them up to speed, so to speak, or build their capacities so that they can compete at the same level, And I have one very simple example. I remember I used to always tell people used to go for this coaching and everything to get into higher classes. And Mr. Vera knows how competitive it is here in India. And I'd always say, these coaching classes, they'll take a 90% student and make them 95, which is great. Okay, fine.
Yes.
How about trying and taking a 70 or a 60% student and making them 95? So the onus is on us to bring up their capacity to 95 and not bring us down to 75.
Yeah, right. And we've experienced that in this country when we find we want to believe that, let's say, Black people and white people raised in a good family with the same opportunities will turn out to have the same intelligence.
Absolutely.
It's not a racial issue.
It is.
It looks like a racial issue because we never brought the Black people up with the advantages that the white people had.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think that, incidentally, if you see our logo, it says purpose, profit, and peace.
Right. The three
That's
P's,
what I
huh?
believe in. Yes. And
purpose, profit, and peace. And what about people?
Yes, so the thing is, we are in two different organizations. So one is the social enterprise and one is the non-profit. And so what we say is sustainable solutions in the social enterprise. And then we look at humanitarian aid, what I spoke about, it's not about us coming down, it's about them coming up to that level. So that's how we do this thing. But I have created a 4 Ps as well, and maybe someday, if you'll allow me, I will share that with you. Incidentally, I went to the US consulate. You won't believe, Mr. Vera, when you called me that day, I was at the US consulate, and right there on the table was this. And I was like marketing manager. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a sign of what? I'm going to be speaking to him right this night. You know, it was like just an incredible coincidence. So yeah, I think been a privilege. I mean, that has been a book that I studied. I remember when I studied it the first time and I shut it and I thought, how can someone think this deep? Literally, that was my, and I still remember that feeling when I finished reading marketing management.
Wonderful.
Pleasure.
Well, it's wonderful to get to know you because we didn't do that last time.
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
I think Walter and I are going to write our own article that answers all these tough questions.
Yeah.
So I'll take
Yeah.
leave now and say that it's wonderful that you're running the organization Rise and
Thank you
having
so much.
such reach. I mean, the reach you have of an audience is very impressive.
And
And
Professor Kotler, you'll not believe we have no sponsorship. Mr. Vieira's here. He knows he's a trustee on my in my
yeah,
foundation, and he's on our advisory board. And they keep asking me, why don't you get sponsorship? I'm like, if I get sponsorship, I will have to dance to their tune. I want to do it the way I want to do it, and I don't want
wonderful.
those restrictions.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
And
thank you so
I'll
much
talk to
once
you
again.
next year again.
I hope it can be earlier than that, and I would very much appreciate. But thank you so much. I tell you, we really, really appreciate. This is the third time we're going to have you at the Rise World Summit, and it's been just amazing. Every single time,
Thank you.
something new and something unique. And of course, I need to thank Mr. Vieira for making this happen. He has, regaled me with the tales of your friendship and his experiences at the Kellogg's Institute. So it's been just amazing. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really.